Good evening and welcome to the Friday webinars at Wharton Arts, featuring artists of different disciplines making authentic connections between art and life through the sharing of stories, expertise, and creations. My name is Helen Chapio, Artistic Director of Wharton Institute for the Performing Arts and the curator of the host of the Friday webinar series. Wharton Institute for the Performing Arts comprises of the New Jersey Youth Symphony, Patterson Music Project, and the Performing Arts School as New Jersey's largest non-for-profit performing arts education organization, serving over 1,200 students of all ages and abilities through a range of classes and ensembles. Tonight, we are so fortunate to have Kevin Cole, often referred as America's pianist. He has delighted audiences with a repertoire that includes the best of American music, and Mr. Cole's performances have prompted accolades from some of the foremost critics in America. We are so blessed to have him tonight, but before I introduce him formally, he would like you to know something about him. So let's go to the video and we'll get to know him a little bit more.
In January of 2017, I noticed that my right side of my face was feeling numb to the touch and cold, actually, when you'd press on it, almost like a Novocaine shot. Now we're in the summer of 2017, and I'm at the movies. And I'm watching a movie and I'm having trouble understanding what they're saying. So I'm cupping my right ear. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I know because of heredity on my dad's side. By the time I get to my 60s, I might suffer some hearing loss, but I'm not in my 60s yet. I said, darn it. So I sloughed that off. Well, now we're in November of 2017. And just a few weeks before Thanksgiving, I start to notice I'm getting headaches, back right side of my head. And I don't get headaches, rarely. And also, I noticed my taste buds are off. I'm having trouble unless something's really strong, sweet or salty tasting. And I noticed that this facial numbness is starting to move towards the center of my face. I thought, okay. And then the hearing thing, I thought, all right, who do I go see? I thought, well, I better go see my ENT. So I told him my symptoms, and he said, have you ever had an MRI? And I said, no, you're going to get one because I have a hunch. So I go in for the MRI results. He walks in, closes the door, and the first words out of his mouth are words you only think you're going to hear in a movie. He says, I wish I had better news. And I looked at him and I said to myself, did I just hear this right? And he said, you have a schwannoma, or what we call an acoustic neuroma. It's one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. I think it's been in your head about 10 years. You have to call Dr. Babu at the Michigan Ear Institute right now. I'll give you his information, and you have to take the MRI and show it to him and get this taken care of.
An acoustic neuroma is a benign tumor that affects the hearing or balance nerve and usually presents with some typical symptoms of hearing loss, ringing in one ear compared to the other, and it can lead to dizziness or imbalance or vertigo sensations. If it gets very big, it actually can cause facial nerve weakness on the one side, and it can also become life-threatening if it becomes a very large tumor.
And I said, but I have one other thing to tell you. He said, what's that? I said, you need to know what I do for a living. I'm a musician. I'm a concert pianist.
So when you have a one-sided hearing loss and you haven't lived with it, it can create some issues for any patient. If you're a professional musician, I think it raises the stakes a bit, and that was his appropriate concern, as was our concern when we were treating him as to how aggressive to be.
Dr. Babu explained to me how he and Dr. Jacob, who is part of the Michigan Head and Spine Institute, work in tandem to make the miracle happen.
Dr. Jacob and I have a great working relationship. We manage patients in a way that we use both of our expertise to the utmost ability. And so in taking out a tumor as complicated as this along the facial nerve, To be honest, the last thing we want is a facial nerve problem in a patient who's a professional musician on stage, let alone the issues with hearing loss. So we want him to come through the surgery as unscathed or without the least amount of complications that can occur.
They open me up, and Dr. Babu assesses what he does, what's going on. And in my case, he told me afterwards that the MRI didn't show the entire size, that the neuroma was larger than either Dr. Jacob or Dr. Babu thought it was from the MRI.
After Dr. Babu performed the exposure, I performed the tumor resection, and that involves removing the tumor off the brainstem and dissecting it off the facial nerve.
But Dr. Jacob is so skilled that he was able to preserve the entire right facial nerve, so I have 100% facial mobility. The day after surgery, I was able to walk unassisted. That was highly unusual. But the doctors say that because of music and what I do, that my brain was constantly rewiring through those 15 years. So I didn't have a lot of balance issues. So when I sat down at the piano and I started to play an excerpt from Rhapsody in Blue, which is one of the pieces I'm well known for, it felt pretty good. I didn't hear it the same way. I liken it to, I used to hear in Technicolor, now I hear in black and white, because I don't have hearing anymore, but that had to happen to save my life.
With very large acoustic neuromas, it's common that patients, by the time they present to us, have poor hearing, or if they have what we consider to be serviceable hearing, quite often that hearing needs to be sacrificed to remove the tumor and decompress the brainstem. And it's very often, especially in those who have serviceable hearing, they're quite concerned about how will they accommodate to all that. And someone like Kevin, whose entire line of work depends on his hearing, how he's accommodated really speaks to the fact that patients accommodate really, really quite well.
I gave them a CD of my piano playing Gershwin, because I hear that sometimes they listen to music in the surgery room. So it was handed to them. And when Dr. Babu started his first few hours of surgery, he listened to it. And then when it was Dr. Jacob's time to come in, Dr. Babu looked at him and said, "You got to hear this. So I'm playing it again while you're working on Kevin." So not only did they work beautifully together, but they listened to my piano playing. And that meant so much to me when I heard about that, because they truly had a full picture of who they were working on. And hopefully it inspired the two of them. I can't stress enough what a team they make.
Wow, that's a very fascinating story. And we are just so excited to hear more from Mr. Cole. But let me just do a very brief introduction. I know I said that he's been referred as America's pianist, and he has been described by critic Andrew Patner as a piano genius. He reveals an understanding of harmony, rhythmic complexity, pure showbiz virtuosity that would have had Vladimir Horowitz smiling with envy. I love that. And also Howard Reich, arts critic for the Chicago Tribune, has described him as, when Mr. Cole sits down at the piano, you would swear Gershwin himself was at work. Mr. Cole stands as the best Gershwin pianist in Americas today. He has played sold-out performances with so many symphony orchestras that I cannot name them all. I could, but we want to hear more from him. LA, Hollywood Bowl, BBC Concert Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, National Symphony at the Kennedy Center, Hong Kong, San Francisco, Chicago, Philadelphia, on and on and on. And his Carnegie Hall debut with Albany Symphony was in May of 2013. He also has shared concert stages with Liza Minnelli, Aretha Franklin, Barbara Streisand, William Warfield, Sylvia McNair, Lauren Mazel, Itzhak Perlman, just crossing all kinds of boundaries of musical styles, but also a close friend and was a close friend and the mentor Marvin Hamlish as well. And we're going to hear where that connection comes from and how lucky we are today to have you here. And I'm just going to invite our wonderful guest artist, Kevin Cole. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Helen.
So great to see you. Thank you so much for spending this Friday evening with us. Had we had it our way, we had it all planned that coming Sunday, December 13th, you were going to play Rhapsody in Blue with the NJYS's Youth Symphony. And we were so looking forward to it. The clarinets were competing to win that principal position so that they can play it. And it was on our excerpt list for this year's audition as well. However, I know that you've been making music even through this because you just released new album playing the concerto in F with Albany, with the music director of Albany Symphony, but with the National Orchestral Institute Symphony, right?
Yes, what's interesting about this is for people who aren't familiar with the National Orchestra Institute, it's a summer program at the University of Maryland, I believe. And what they do is they have the best of the best up and coming symphony performers from the ages of 18 to I think about 28 years old. And it's kind of a way for them to spread their wings and get prepared for auditioning for big symphony orchestras around the world. But this orchestra is so phenomenal, this wonderful, I would say it would be the next step, for like say from college age, but it just helps them get into the literature and the repertoire they need to have a life playing in a symphony orchestra. What was terrific about this recording and being asked to do it was I've been waiting most of my life to start recording the 4 works that Gershwin wrote for piano and orchestra. And of course, the Rhapsody in Blue, the variations on I Got Rhythm, the Concerto in F, and the second Rhapsody. So when David Allen Miller, our wonderful conductor of the Albany Symphony, suggested to them that we do the Concerto in F in the original orchestration, which is was just finished, actually, the ink was just wet, in the sense that the University of Michigan has taken upon itself to do what they call the Gershwin Initiative. And this is a multi-year project in which they're going back to Gershwin's original manuscripts that became heavily edited by people in the 1940s, especially because Gershwin died in 1937 at the age of 38. And since he didn't have the formal training that a lot of serious editors and musicians thought he should have, they a lot of times looked at his orchestrations for symphony orchestras as unorthodox and just not standard enough. So they edited and changed voicings and all kinds of stuff. So now, like we have done with Beethoven and Mozart and some of our serious, well, I shouldn't say serious, let's just put it this way, our older classical composers, we are now looking at American music that way and saying, those weren't mistakes by Gershwin. He intended those voicings or those colors from the orchestra. So now what is so exciting to me is to be able to play it exactly note for note as he played it. And to have the opportunity to record it and have that recording come out, because it just came out barely a month ago.
Exactly.
And we're starting to get some really wonderful write-ups and reviews about it.
Absolutely. I think Chicago Tribune said it is one of the best recordings of 2020. So, I think all of us need to go and get that, for the holidays. Absolutely.
It's on the Naxos label. If you're looking, and you can go to their website. I recommend going there to get it rather than some of the other website clearinghouses that should go unnamed. They don't need my publicity. But I think people say, well, what's the difference from the Concerto in F we've heard? Because next to the Rhapsody in Blue, the Concerto in F is the second most performed piano piece in any given symphony year.
Right.
And so well, what's the difference? Well, I notice a difference. Two things you'll notice. First of all, the clarity of the recording, that you hear colors and things, the layers of things are just, it's not as smushed together as past recordings. So that helps immensely just from an audio standpoint. The other thing though is there are color changes and voicings that are coming through that had been changed, and now they're going back to what Gershwin wanted. And I guess if there was a third thing, I guess it's me, because apparently I have a very good way of being very chameleon-like when it comes to taking on the form or taking on the emotion and what the composer wanted. And because even though I've been told I sound like Gershwin when I play by people who knew him, his sister and close inner circle, and this was said to me back when I was a teenager, no one will ever play like Gershwin or Rachmaninoff or Liszt, who I always put those three together because they're the top three composer pianists. Mm-hmm. And that there's a difference when you're a really virtuoso pianist and you write for yourself or symphony orchestra. It's a whole different ball game than somebody who isn't. Because again, those three were also the ones out there playing their works and selling their works by their performances. They were their best promoters of their own compositions. And most composers can't do that. But yeah, so in Gershwin's case, I'm just excited that people now will finally get to hear it more. I don't want to say it's not a historic recording, but I guess more with the energy and the excitement of what he intended with it. Because it's that fine line, as you were talking about. You're reading my intro, and I say, I want to meet this Kevin Cole. This is kind of neat. But you have to have I have a classical background. I mean, that my studies were really rigid in the sense that they were structured. And I'm a graduate of the Interlochen Center for the Arts in Michigan. And so I had really good training, but I also always had a love of American musical theater, popular song, jazz. So it's like the classical side of me gave me the technique that you have to play this music. But also the improvisational skills I have as a more popular, jazzy kind of thing, they kind of work hand in hand.
Right.
It's interesting.
I think, you've been called, kind of rebirthed Gershwin by people who knew, as you said, Gershwin, and heard him play live. I know that you have so many wonderful stories to tell us how you came to really just, be obsessed perhaps with Gershwin's music, and how you got your first break and the book that changed your life. There's so many stories. So I'm going to leave you. I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to just ask you to tell the story. And I know you're going to play some for us, and which we are so grateful for. And we want to kind of get to know what kind of, not the career that you've had, but perhaps, something that's a little deeper, that when you were 15, how you came about, really setting this journey that brought you here. And we have lots of young musicians here in this webinar listening. And we are just already so inspired by your story and the connection with Gershwin. I know, I'm going to just say this one thing. I read that Gershwin actually had a brain tumor. Yes. And Gershwin actually died of a brain tumor. And you had a brain tumor. I just said, we can't make this up.
No. In the old days of Hollywood, even the script probably would have had trouble getting a movie made of it. They say, oh, come on. Because the thing is, all those years of people saying you sound like Gershwin, and then to find out I have a tumor, it's a different kind of tumor. Okay. But the interesting thing about it, where mine was on this side, but the neuroma moves, and it's a type of tumor that wants to move down to the base of your skull, and once it gets there, it kills you. Well, Gershwin's tumor was already at the base of his skull, and killed him. So when I got the diagnostic, when I took the MRI down, well, at first it was shocking to me to get this news up here
Right.
in
Of
Michigan.
course.
And then I went down with the MRI, the Dr. Babu, and I just remember going back in the car after him explaining what was going on. And I looked up to the heavens and I said, okay, George, I've been accused of playing and sounding like you. I've been accused of being reincarnated. Did you have to give me the tumor? I mean, that's going a little too far, you know? So I have to joke about it because it is the ironic thing to have that as part of my journey.
It is better than a story that you can make up, right? But I know that, you will talk a little bit about your kind of hearing loss and you're overcoming these difficulties, and you kept on, this was just only a few years ago. So,
Yeah.
so tell us the story and share your music, and then I will come back at the end for some Q&A. So
Okay.
as you're hearing Mr. Cole's stories and hearing the music, if something comes to your mind, please just put it in the Q&A or chat, and we'll get to your question. Okay. So thank you, and take it away.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me in your home or wherever you are viewing me. I think it's just super cool that you can, be laying on your bed or in your car and we can chat. So what happened with me was I started formal piano lessons at the age of 4 because my parents noticed how I reacted to music from the time I was in the crib. They had a big record collection, and I know some of you, well, your parents remember records. They're made out of black vinyl, and they were either 45s or 33s or 78s, which meant just the speed they spun at while the needle took over. But anyway, my parents had a lot of different types of music in their record collection, and they saw that anytime they put something on, I was moving to it. I mean, and I wasn't just wild moving to it, that I was really moving to it and also trying to sing along. Our neighbors had an old upright piano, and when I was 3, I believe, I was over there. And as little kids do, you put your fingers on all the black keys, because when you push all the black keys down, they sound pretty good. But when you start putting those white keys in there, it kind of clashes. So my folks said, hey, let's get a piano. My dad had had some piano lessons, but then switched over to trumpet when he was in school. My aunt in Detroit got rid of her piano, and asked my dad, anybody in the family want it? And my dad said, we'll take it. So after about 3 years of piano lessons with a local teacher here in Bay City, Michigan. Now, if you've ever heard the name Bay City, Michigan, you might know it because it's the birthplace of the mega pop star Madonna. We also had an Olympic skater by the last name of McDermott, who came here and who was from here and won medals. And also the Bay City Rollers is a pop group from the 1970s that some of your parents might remember, had a few hits. But at any rate, when I was 7 years old, I saw a commercial on television for a late night movie called Rhapsody in Blue, the story of George Gershwin. It was going to be on a Tuesday night at 11:30 at night. Now that was a school night. I'm in 2nd grade, and my 2nd grade, you're in bed by 7:30, at least when I was little. So I remember coming home from school and saying to my parents, so I do all my homework and I go to bed now, which would have been like 5:30, 6 o'clock. Will you wake me up at 11:30 to watch this movie? And they said, sure. I watched the movie and the music just hit me like a thunderbolt. I mean, just really struck me. Now, I had heard about George Gershwin, but I didn't know anything. Years later, I found out that the movie script was all pure Hollywood and really wasn't much about his life. But the performers in the film were fantastic. Al Jolson, the original cast of Porgy and Bess, Oscar Levant, all these people who performed Gershwin's music and premiered many of Gershwin's songs and compositions were in it. So you were getting the authentic thing. So I immediately said to my mom the next morning, when we go to the library on Saturday, which was our day to go, my brothers and I, can I find a book on Gershwin? Now, granted, I'm 7 years old, okay? So in those days, books like that would be in the adult section, which your parent had to check out because you had to go to the kids section. So I went right up to the desk at our public library and I said, excuse me, do you have any books on George Gershwin? And the librarian looked very surprised, but she said, just a moment. She came back and she said, here's the best one. It's called The Gershwin Years by Lawrence Stewart and Edward Jablonski. And by the way, did you know that Edward Jablonski is from Bay City, Michigan? Well, I was just flabbergasted because I thought, wow, somebody who knows about Gershwin wrote a book about him. It's from my hometown where I'm living right now. Fast forward 8 years later, and I'm 15, and I'm going to New York to audition for Tanglewood. And I'm sure many of you have heard of that. I've yet to be at Tanglewood. Maybe they'll invite me sometime. But anyway, I went for an audition at 15 to New York City, my first trip to New York City. The moment we got in the Sheraton Hotel downtown, it was actually the Americana Hotel then, I pulled out the Manhattan phone book, which was huge, and looked up Jablonski E for Ed Jablonski. Now, there was a whole bunch of Jablonski E's. And I'm like, so I literally went like this, and I put my finger down in the book. And when I did that, I made a call, a cold call, and said, somebody picked up the phone. It was a guy, and said hello. And I said, hi, my name is Kevin Cole. I'm from Bay City, Michigan. I play the piano, and I love Gershwin. And there was laughter on the other end of the phone. And after a few moments of talking, he and his wife, Edith, invited me over the next day for supper. And he had a little spinet piano, a little Baldwin spinet, in his living room of his New York apartment. He was a well-known writer because he'd written books about American composers. He wrote the Encyclopedia of American Music. He's written books on World War II and aviation, and just a really neat guy, okay? So after dinner, he said, well, would you like to play for us? And I said, boy, would I. So I played a little short Gershwin medley of my own creation, and I think the Gershwin Preludes number 1 and 2 for piano. And when I got done, Ed Jablonski said something that changed my life. He said, has anyone ever told you when you play Gershwin, you sound like Gershwin? And I said, no. And then he said, have you ever heard Gershwin play? And I'm thinking to myself, well, how old does he think I am? So then he put on reel-to-reel tape recordings of radio broadcasts from the early 30s of Gershwin playing the piano, but also speaking. So for the very first time, I got to hear Gershwin talk and play. And Ed Jablonski said, don't you think you sound like that? And I had to admit, but it was a weird feeling because I had never heard him. I had no way in Bay City, Michigan of being exposed to how you play this. It was just the way the notes flew off the page into my head and into my heart. And that's how they came out. From that meeting, I would spend my summers for a couple weeks each summer with the Jablonskis and their kids, because his youngest daughter was my age, and would play recordings for me, and I got to play and meet George Gershwin, George and Ira's sister. Her husband at the time was Leopold Godowsky II, whose father was the famous pianist Leopold Godowsky, and the inner circle of people who really knew George Gershwin. And I played for them. And when I did that, they wept and said, we haven't heard the piano sound like this since George. And at that time, I was all of 18 years old. So what do you do with that when you get that kind of recognition or reaction? It was kind of like Twilight Zone. I didn't know what to do with that. They were of an age, the people that knew Gershwin, and when I played for them in their upper 70s and starting to go into their 80s. So most of the people they knew in show business that could have helped my career were already long gone or out of the business. But subsequently, in other times I'd visit within the 2-3 years of that first meeting, I would play on Steinways that Gershwin himself picked out for his friends and family, where he used to play for parties and gatherings at their New York apartments. And the reaction, they'd call up all their friends in their 70s and 80s who were at those parties, and just they would all shake their heads and say, how does he do this? In fact, English Strunsky, who would have been Ira Gershwin's brother-in-law, okay, said to Ed Jablonski at one of these gatherings, how does he know how to play like George? And Ed says, well, you can't explain it. He just does. So it's just one of those strange things. How does Ed Jablonski, who was the world's greatest authority on George Gershwin, who's also from Bay City, Michigan, how does that happen? And I'm from Bay City, Michigan. I mean, it's just something in the water, in the air, who knows? To make the story even more personal and stranger, when my mother's father, my mother's Polish, when her father passed away, And I'm at the funeral home in Bay City. I came because I was living out of town at, was I? No, actually, I was living in town at the time. I was still in high school. But I had just played for Jablonski and I had known him now for about 2 years. All right. So at the funeral home, my mom and I are sitting together, you know, people are coming to visit, and she sees her mother, my grandma, talking to some lady. And my mom goes, I don't know who that is. I'm going to go see. She goes up. 5 minutes later, she comes back to me. She says, you're not going to believe this. I said, what? Your grandma and Ed Jablonski's mother are best girlfriends that grew up on the farms outside of Bay City, Michigan, you know, way back in the teens, you know, like 1910s. So they've been best girlfriends. And now you know. So again, this was all meant to be. It comes full circle. Okay, so now you know my connection to the Gershwin legacy. But let me tell you just a little bit about Gershwin, and then I'll play something. I'll play you his first piece that was ever published, piano piece. He did some songwriting pieces, but this is the first actual piano solo piece that was published. When Gershwin was born, he was born September 26th, 1898, okay, from a family of four. Ira was born first, 2 years earlier, then George, then Ira 1896, George 1898, Arthur, another brother, 1900, and then Frankie, or Frances, the only daughter or sister, she was born 10 years to the date of Ira in 1906. Okay, so George Gershwin comes along and he doesn't like music. He skipped school. I mean, he was like a ruffian. He was good at roller skating, played stickball in the streets in Brooklyn, New York, but had no use for anybody. In fact, anybody who liked music at school, he thought was a sissy and didn't want anything to do with them. This is George Gershwin. Unlike, you know, Mozart. Oh, wow, you know, 2 years old and he's balancing a piano in one hand and playing a flute in the other. I mean, it's craziness. Not Gershwin. Nope, don't like music. Sissy, get away. And he was kind of a bully. But something happened. When he was, excuse me, I believe around 11 years old, he was playing hooky, skipping school one day. So, but he knew one of his friends. Now, how this kid slipped in to Gershwin's circle of friends, I have no idea, because he played the violin. And his name was Max Rosen. So somehow Gershwin overlooked the fact that he played violin and he was his friend. But he was curious enough that on a day he was skipping school, there was a school recital and Max was going to be playing the violin. And for some reason, George goes, I want to go see what he's doing. So, but he said, but if I do, the truant officer, they'll see me and then they'll pull me into school. So he actually snuck into the schoolyard under the window of the recital hall or whatever gymnasium, whatever they had during this recital. His friend Max was playing a piece by Dvorak called Humoresque. It was the perfect piece for Gershwin to hear, because if you know anything about that piece, which is, oh, I'm not there yet, am I? Hang on, I can do it. Are we there?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
Almost there.
I was gonna give you a little example. Hang on, folks. We love this stuff.
Okay, almost there.
There we go. Now, I just played the last few bars because it was those blue notes that really turned the key in Gershwin. I mean, he just like all of a sudden, what was that? So after the recital, he ran to Max's house. Max wasn't even home yet, and waited till he got home. And all he wanted to do was talk about music. Excuse me. So you never know what it takes that turns on the light bulb or gets somebody to go into a life in music. And for Gershwin, he didn't start out. Who knows what he would have been? Probably a bum. But it was that hearing that piece of music unlocked something in him. And he even said to Max, he goes, I'm going to be something great in music one of these days. And Max thought, this is ridiculous. He said, George, you will never become a musician. That made George so mad that they fought like kids do. And they were rolling on the ground and they're fighting and their hands are going. And George didn't talk to Max for several months. So to tidy this up, so I promise I'll play.
So this is what George did, because he didn't say anything to his mom about piano lessons or anything. No, no, no. Up down the street, his friends had a player piano, the one with the rolls. In those days, you had to pedal it to make the music happen. What George would do, he was skipping school without anybody knowing. He would go over to that player piano and pump it. And as the keys would go down, he was putting his fingers in them to learn 2 popular songs of the day. So here's what happens with the Gershwin family. Mama Gershwin's sister gets a piano. Well, in those days, which would have been around, I'm talking 1909, maybe 1908, having a piano in your household, didn't matter what kind, was a status symbol. So Mama Gershwin wasn't going to be outdone by her sister. So she says, Morris, to her husband, Morris, we're getting a piano. So they get a piano. It gets hoisted up to the 2nd floor of their Brooklyn brick apartment house or whatever they're living in, gets through the window, gets put up against the wall. And here they thought Ira, being the oldest, would be the one to play. George runs to the piano, sits down, and plays those 2 songs that he had taught himself by putting his fingers in the piano keys as they went down on the player piano. Everyone was flabbergasted. They're like, what? So Ira felt he was off the hook. Oh, good, because Mama says, George is going to take piano lessons. Then she looked at Ira, and Ira, you're going to take violin lessons. And he goes, rats. So that was the start. So he started with the local teacher down the block for a quarter. Then he went to a better teacher. Eventually, by the age of 15, he was so good at improvising and playing, he got a job at a sheet music place. And his job was the sheet music publisher for those popular songs would put a stack of their music on a little upright piano in a room as big as a closet. And they had like 25 of those rooms in a building, all with a little window. And this is what we call Tin Pan Alley. And the reason they got that name was because if you walked outside, the sound of all those pianos playing at once, these old uprights out of tune, sounded like somebody pounding tin pans together. Okay? Simple as that. Well, George got so good, he could take a stinky, lousy written song and improvise and make it sound so good. He was selling more sheet music than anybody. Because you have to understand, there was no radio then. Recordings were very early recordings on record. But what they did was they buy the music and they put it in their stage show, in their vaudeville stage show. And the singer, if it became a hit, they'd have the music in the lobby as people left and they'd sell it for 10 cents, 15 cents, quarter. And if a song became a million seller, that was an amazing thing. That meant people actually were buying the sheet music for their piano at home, okay? So, but George itched to play, just like I am, George itched to play and sell his own music, but the publisher wouldn't hear about it. No, you're too good at that. No. Your job is to sell art, not be, because he was trying to slip his own music into those piles to sell to people. So what I'm going to play for you right now, before I talk myself into a circle, is the first published piano piece called Rialto Ripples. But they weren't going to publish it, except Walter Donaldson, who was a hit songwriter. The biggest song you might know him for is Carolina in the Morning. Okay, he liked George, and he said, look, they won't publish it with just your name on it, but we're going to put my name and your name, even though you had nothing to do with it, because then they'll publish it. And so they did. Rialto Ripples, which is he wrote in 1917, I believe. It's the end of the ragtime era, but it's still ragtime, but you're also going to hear some chord changes that sound a little more modern than Joplin would have done. I'm going to speed things up here a little bit. So that was kind of a little launching pad. And within 2 years, George wrote his first big hit called Swanee. And it was a huge hit. It was a million seller. He made $10,000 with that song in 1 year. Yeah, I guess around 1920, which was a huge amount of money in 1920. It was almost like $1 million, seriously. It was enormous. Okay, so he's starting to have these little hits. And then 1924 came along, which is the year he wrote the Rhapsody in Blue. And there's a big story about that, but that's for another webinar. But he wrote his first full musical with his brother Ira, because Ira was writing under another name, writing lyrics for songs and for shows. Because as George was becoming popular, he thought, Ira said, I don't want people to think I'm riding on his coattails, because my brother's famous. Oh, here's my other brother that writes for. So he wanted to establish himself as his own good songwriter. So he used the name Arthur Francis. If that sounds familiar, that's because it's the brother and sister's name put together. But by 1924, Arthur Francis had enough success so that when everyone said, he said, I'm Ira Gershwin, everyone went, oh, and they wrote a musical called Lady Be Good. So George, for the first time, actually wrote a song called Fascinating Rhythm, wrote the music. Ira had a devil of a time putting lyrics to that tune. But I'm going to play my version of Fascinating Rhythm for two reasons. One is because you can still hear ragtime figures in it, especially because of the stride, what we call when the hand goes octave, chord, all that stuff. You still hear that in it, but the harmonies have taken this a whole nother level up. The other reason I'm playing this is because this was the first song I played when I met Marvin Hamlisch. And as we said earlier, Marvin Hamlisch is the reason I'm here tonight. I mean, isn't that bizarre? But I was lucky enough to play for him for 8 years when we were doing Gershwin concerts all over the country. And when he passed away suddenly, and my heart ached so much that I said, I got to do something. I got to do my own tribute. So I put together my own symphonic Marvin tribute. And Terry Blair Hamlisch, Marvin's widow, we were already good friends, but then she said, oh, we got to do this show more. And you got to do it with Peter Gestelink in Kalamazoo. So we did, and we made a CD of it just from one night. And so then I met Peter, and now you have Peter. So the connection is bizarre. But Marvin heard me play this song when I was warming up before the first time we were going to perform together. And I didn't see him come on stage because I go really early in the morning to warm up on the Steinway to see what I have. Because as you know, I don't carry my Steinway in my back pocket. So I'm shaking hands with a stranger every time I play a concert. So I'm just using Fascinating Rhythm as I normally do to see what the piano will and will not let me do. And Marvin's coming around the other side of the stage and I don't even know it. But it was a story he told at every concert we played pretty much, because he thought, because he couldn't see me when he first came to the back of the stage, he thought there was two pianists. And so he got the biggest charge of telling the audience. He said, not only it wasn't two pianists, it was one pianist. And he said, and I know Kevin, and if he wasn't such a good guy, I'd shoot him. Because he said, it just wasn't fair that I could do that with 10 fingers. So I'm going to play my arrangement. It's only 2 minutes. And then Helen's going to come back and we're going to open things up to you. A Fascinating Rhythm. And let's see if Marvin was right, okay?
Wow. Oh my goodness gracious. Bravo. Bravo. I know we're all clapping. We just can't hear in this wonderful world called Zoom. But please imagine us on our feet clapping. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if that's really possible with 10 fingers, but you did it. So we know it's possible. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that inspirational story. I know that we can do about 10 webinars on your connection and your knowledge about just the whole American songbook, essentially. And so I know we don't have a lot of time left, and I know that you wanted to do one more playing, which I know we are all like dying to hear. So as the attendees are putting their questions in, I have one.
Sure.
I read a whole bunch of interviews and some articles about kind of your recent tribulation with this brain tumor.
Yeah.
But and you had said now that you've kind of been given second chance. What has changed? Did anything change, or what kind of different feelings or on the stage and as you share music that you are bringing because of this difficult situation that you went through?
Well, I have been performing, I guess since I was 11 years old publicly. And at a certain point, you don't analyze what you do, you just do it. And when people ask you, well, how do you do this or how do you do that? Well, if I'm in a master class, sure, there are certain things I can show them that I do, but the way I play and the way I hear things, I don't get in the way of myself. This is just who I am and what I was blessed with and the technique and whatnot. So, but I was used to hearing the world in stereo. And of course, this ear, my right ear, is what faces the concert hall. And so when you play and the sound goes out and comes back, this is what you gauge your dynamics for whatever size of room, okay? Mm-hmm. When I'm with orchestra, of course, I'm deaf in my I'm deaf in my right ear. I'm good in my left ear. Well, I have, 80 to 100 pieces of music, of instruments trying to squeeze into that ear. The piano, meanwhile, has to go around the room and circle like a boomerang, and it's fighting for space in my ear. So physically speaking, I have to think and concentrate differently so that I can hear the piano, because I'm not really hearing the piano that much up close because it's going into the room. So I have to really say, okay, the piano's in there somehow. But the biggest thing was when I first sat down to play on a keyboard, because I was recovering at my cousin's in the Detroit area because he was closer to the hospital, so that I could see the doctors several times for 8 weeks, okay, of recovery, the initial recovery. I waited, I didn't play for 3 weeks, and I could have, but I didn't touch the keyboard for 3 weeks after the surgery.
That must be a little scary.
It was, but when I first played, I played a piece of the Rhapsody in Blue, as I mentioned in the video. I realized I wasn't hearing it. So the first thing is, am I giving too much pressure? Am I playing louder to compensate that I'm only hearing half of what I used to hear? So I asked my cousin, he goes, no, I don't. I said, am I banging? No. So after I started practicing for a couple of days, and I just did it in short bursts, I realized something for the first time. I used to think that 80% of what I do is audio or oral, and 20% is the physical. It's 50-50. Now, again, some people say, well, you got good motor memory, because you play these pieces so often, but I've never relied on motor memory. That's a scary thing. But I did realize for the first time, because I had to analyze it, that not only through hearing do I know my full dynamic range and how to play softest softs and the loudest louds, but I also know through touch.
Right.
And I didn't really realize that fully, that I know how much weight to play my softest softs if I never hear another note. Okay, so that's the technique side.
Right.
Biggest thing was, how do I feel inside? Do I still feel the same when I'm making music as I did when I had both my ears. Okay, and I do. And the testimony to that was, and you probably read about that, was 8 weeks to the day of my surgery. 8 weeks to the day. So I had my surgery. What was it? March 17th, I believe it was. No, March 19th. May 19th, I did the toughest concert of my life with the Albany Symphony.
Yes.
I had made a deal with David Allen Miller a year and a half earlier that we were going to do this weekend called a Gershwin Infusion. And that I would do all 4 works for piano and orchestra, but spread out over 2 nights. Okay. Well, then because of budgets and orchestra members and whatnot, the 2 concerts became 1 concert. And I had not told David right away that I had this brain tumor. I waited till like 2 weeks before the surgery to let him know. And I said to the, this is the maestro, the conductor, I said, David, I got a little something I'd talk to you about. What's that? Well, I'm going to go in for brain surgery in 2 weeks. Nothing to worry about, but let's put it this way. I don't know how I'm going to be on the other side of this. And if I can play 1 piece, I'll play 1. If I can play 2, play 2. I said, I don't know if I can do it, because I had made the deal when they combined the concerts instead of 2 nights into 1. I said, David, I will play all 4 works in 1 evening.
Oh my goodness, that's
Which,
amazing.
to my knowledge, no one had ever done. And knowing Albany's audiences, that also means plenty of encores too. So
yes.
And so then when he found out about the brain tumor, he said, no, don't even worry about it. I'll just do a Gershwin concert orchestra. I said, no, David, I need this goal before I go into the surgery room. So when I came out and we were getting closer, he said, what do you think? I said, I want to go for it. I said, this is the Olympics for me to play all 4. And this will be the very first time I'm playing in public. Now, talk about, I'm either really dumb or, as a friend of mine years ago said, you're like a little biplane with a 747 engine inside of it. He said, because you go for a nosedive, but at the last moment, you know how to pull out. So I didn't know how it was going to be, but it was, if anything was going to reaffirm what I should be doing with my life, that was the moment. Yeah.
That was an incredible weekend. Yeah, that was amazing. Well, you know what? I should tell you that there's a question. Sure. People are curious about how long it takes for you to learn the piece that you just played. I think the
fascinating rhythm.
I know that's your arrangement of that.
But, well, as with all my arrangements, it starts by just improvising. I know the tune and the structure of the 32-bar song, and I start fooling it. You have to figure out what keys you're going to be playing with as far as the notation. So, I'm in E flat, but then I fool with that a little bit. So you just play around, and then all of a sudden it starts to feel right, because I don't write any of these out. People go, what if something happens to you? I said, well, you got recordings, somebody can transcribe it,
Right.
But I played them enough that they're in here. They're pretty solid. But yeah, they're just improvisations. So if I was going to tell you how long it took me to create the fascinating rhythm, probably over a weekend.
Wow. That's like Mozart.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
But I should also tell you that New Jersey Youth Symphony, we have a lot of clarinetists, and our flagship group, CL Quartet, that's Clarinet Quartet. Yeah. Its director, Brian Rotero, is also a clarinetist and a composer. He arranged for the Clarinet Quartet for 4 B-flat clarinets, the Rialto Ripples.
Oh, and I love it.
I'm going to send you a recording of that. Please, and I'm sure Brian will be happy to share that with you. But when I heard you play, I was like, oh, clarinets. I think there's some clarinet players here. They took it a little bit slower than your fingers could move, but it was pretty good.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Well, you know what? I think we can go on and on and on with this conversation. And I know that it's just so fascinating. So you must come back. Rain check with, post COVID-19. We have to give our clarinets a chance to play that beginning of Rhapsody in Blue. And so I know, we will take.
Yeah, go ahead.
One more question. Do you play any other instrument?
Just anything with keyboards. I own 4 accordions because being half Polish, you have to grow up knowing how to play some polkas. And I used to play theater organ for a time in my life when I was in my 20s for silent movies.
Yeah.
So,
you did that.
and I also played for church services, synagogue services, anything with keyboards, I'm there.
Right, right. And I know that for Zoom, rather than trying to get a good sound out of a nice Steinway, just because the Zoom still has a lot of sound issues, you are at a keyboard right now, and it's a MIDI, and we're feeding the sound straight from Logic with Paul's help, Kevin's friend. And somebody was asking, what's the second keyboard for? But I think we're just, we would.
I'm in his studio, and
Right.
he's a composer, arranger himself. And so this is his workspace. But from what you've told me, it's actually the way we're doing it sounds pretty good.
Yes, this is much better than trying to play it on a Steinway and Son because of the sound waves and kind of interacting and interrupting. So thank you so much for this arrangement. And I am so heartbroken that it is 8:00, but we're going to continue on. And I know that you were supposed to play this coming weekend with us, Rhapsody in Blue, and I think you're going to treat us with something from it. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to do an excerpt from what we call the Andante, or the love theme, to the end. And so it's about 6 minutes, if you can all hang in there.
Of course.
And please have me back, because this was a joy.
Oh gosh, we will absolutely have you back. And so ending of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and I'll come back to just say thank you, but enjoy and take it away. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Woo! Bravo! Bravo! Bravissimo! Yay! Thank you so much. Wow. Oh, you just, brought so much joy to my heart. And I'm sure if everybody could speak with you, that's what they would feel. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I have to say that, I know with the Zoom, there was some sort of a lag there as you're playing as well, like a microsecond, like half a second delay. I don't know how you did that. It was absolutely remarkable.
Well, I had Marvin on my shoulder.
Right. And he said, you can do it. You got 10 fingers, but you can do it. Thank you so much, Kevin. And, on behalf of the entire Wharton Institute of Performing Arts and on behalf of our dear friend, Peter Gistelink, we are just so grateful that you can be here. And we wish you all the best during these holiday seasons and be well and come back, please.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. This really finishes our Friday webinar series. However, we'll come back in January and we'll continue to bring you informative and a variety of artists who can share their life stories and what it means to be an artist and sharing life and art together. So have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season. And we thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Kevin, so much.